Good day, everyone, and welcome to our College Sports Communicators On-Demand webinar presented by the CSC Diversity and Inclusion Committee. We're pleased to offer this session on the state of DEI in college athletics. We want to thank you for joining us for this important session as we discuss the state of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our society today, especially as it relates to the world of college athletics. My name is Travis Strum, the Associate Athletic Director at Jackson State University and Vice Chair of the CSC Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I'm joined by Scottie Rodgers, the Director of the Communications at the Goodyear Cotton Bowl and Chair of the CSC Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And we're honored to be joined by JenFry, one of the leading voices in the DEI space and owner of JenFryTalks, a social justice education firm that explores the intersection of conflict and DEI. Jen, we want to thank you for joining us today. And to be frank, this is a conversation that needs to happen. And we'll start it this way. The world we live in today is, we were going one direction when it came to DEI. Now we're going in another direction when it comes to DEI, with state governments now getting involved and not just saying DEI is unimportant, but starting to shut down the diversity, equity, inclusion offices around the country at colleges and universities. How important is DEI and how much does that impact what's going on in today?
Yeah, Travis and Scottie, first, I want to appreciate you for having me on here and having these type of conversations. You know, I think the biggest thing is that we need to recognize that they're not only pulling out DEI offices, they're actually creating legislation. And that's the key thing that we need to understand, is that while within the world the pendulum swings, I think we have to understand how it affects the pendulum when legislation is being pulled away. And that's the key thing we have to see with affirmative action, with Roe v. Wade, with the things they're doing. They're actively creating legislation. And that's the thing that people are not paying attention to, is the legislative piece and how that's going to affect not only us, but our children's children for decades and centuries to go. The legislation piece is a pretty big one. And I think whenever we think about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it usually centers around race-based, which is what people hold on to in the aspect of calling folks woke and all these other words that they're using. But we have to look at it as a big umbrella. We have to look at it as the ability to have ramps. We have to look at it as the ability to have interpreters. We have to look at it as the ability to have accessibility. Like all of those things that are key components, even though college sports is very able-bodied, right? You're not seeing like Paralympic stuff. Usually maybe in swimming, you'll see that, but for the most part, it's going to be able-bodied people. And so we're leaving out a lot of the accessibility part whenever we're pulling back DEI. We're pulling back, we're taking out the part of what it looks like for making sure that there are multiple different viewpoints on stories to make sure that stories are told in an equitable way. It, like, pulling back DEI, it has major consequences because by 2025, we're going to be a majority minority country. And so how can we have a majority minority country without being able to say that we're fully investing in equity in all aspects to make sure the people that have been the most harmed are being centered and in a way being pulled up?
Yeah, that's a great point, because one of the things that we've been talking about is how to keep DEI at the forefront. And it's not necessarily the words, the letters, it's the practice of, and you talked about the practice of it, trying to make sure that we do what we need to do, understanding that there's legislation that keeps you in some places away from potentially doing it the way that you do it. But it's still trying to have a diverse and inclusive society is still very important. And your society could be your athletic department, your conference office, your campus, whatever the case may be. How have you started talking to people about trying to keep that at the forefront while also being mindful of the legislation that is coming around? Because there's, people are probably uneasy as soon as they hear legislation. They're like, well, we can't do this anymore. Well, that's not necessarily the case. So how are you starting to talk to people and educate people on how they can continue to do what they're doing without obviously breaking any laws?
Well, I think the thing we have to think about is that it's not only about breaking laws, it's about people worried about being fired. Like that's at the end of the day, that's the biggest thing, is people being worried about being fired. Because what some of these laws have done is it's very opaque. you don't know if you're breaking it. So what we're tending to see, like with the like the ban LGBT stuff in Florida, there's not necessarily specific rules. What they do is they make it so opaque that you're fearful that at any point you might break the rule because you don't know what it is. And so that's the biggest thing we have to think about is, and I get it when we're thinking about this, people are like, I got a mortgage, the economy is tough, I got bills to pay. And there's also different ways you can do it. I think the first thing is that when you are looking to hire, a way to do that is to make sure that you have a rubric. Like the thing about college athletics is that the job is posted Tuesday, the job's already been filled 5 days ago. Like that's just the way it is. And how can we make sure that we're doing stuff like, do we have a rubric on the type of people that we want to hire? Because we're seeing hirings and then firings just as fast because they didn't check up on people. They didn't see their history. It was just like, yo, I want to hire my friend. It's like, okay, done. And then the friend's hired on Monday. On Tuesday, it finds out there are some really bad things that this friend has done. Now they're fired on Wednesday. And so what does it look like that we can take a step back and have a rubric and say, we understand that these are the people we want to hire, but we need to have a rubric of what things are we looking for with this? What type of making sure that when we're looking at our the applicant pool, that we have a deep applicant pool. Sometimes people say, well, these are only the people that applied. Well, if you only put it like on one little place that only certain people know where to look, of course, that's what you're going to get. So how can we make sure that we're getting a robust applicant pool? Because the thing about it, and I think, so one of the things I've done is I've made a shift from race and sport to talking about conflict and culture. Because we need to talk more about conflict in more nuance. And the reality of it, of a homogeneous, all alike team or staff is going to get along a little better. Like, let's be honest. When you have everyone that is very similar, the culture fit, they're all going to get along. There's not going to be as much rubbing. When you have a bunch of different people, oh, baby, that rubbing is going to cause a forest fire. And people are not used to the fires. They're not used to conflict. And so conflict of difference makes it really difficult for people who aren't trained in that. And that's what you tend to see, is you will see a team that has been majority homogeneous hires one different person that's not the same culture. And that person is going to cause some rubbing because they're going to come with different viewpoints, different thoughts, pushback. And folks aren't used to that. And so then guess what we're going to do? Well, Scottie, unfortunately, you're just not a culture fit here. Versus understanding that when you have a very different group of people, the rubbing is going to happen, but that's also when the great ideas are going to occur. And that's why you want to make sure your applicant pool is really robust, because you want different viewpoints. You want different ideas. You don't want everyone to have the same, yes, that's good. Yes, that's good. Because I think we can all attest to it that we've seen times when everyone's been the same in a group and they let something slide that's really bad. And everyone's like, how did this get by? It's because they didn't have those different viewpoints. So I think the first thing is making sure you have a robust applicant pool. I think the second thing, like I said, is that people need to be prepared for conflict. What we saw was a lot of people putting out Black Lives Matter statements, and then there might be one donor, one news source that's like, how could this school do that? And the school folds like a bad suit, right? They pull it back. We're seeing that with Johns Hopkins, where the DEI, the chief DEI person gave a definition of privilege, and that made donors mad. And then she had to do the rebuttal, and then she ended up resigning. And this literally 3 years ago, this was the school that had all these Black Lives Matter articles and all this stuff. But now people are so afraid of conflict that they don't know how to handle it. So one or two people or one or two news sources will say something and they just fold. Instead of saying, this is who we are, this is what we stand for. We understand that people are going to be upset no matter what way. And in order to be able to still do certain things, you have to be okay with conflict. Depending on what state you're in, depends on that level of conflict and having to understand. But I think that people are so afraid without realizing, I mean, let's be honest, Travis and Scottie, y'all you do social media, you do communication, all that. How long does a story usually last in the news cycle? A bad story.
Bad story, usually a while. I mean,
But that's like super, super bad,
yeah.
right? Most things where it's just some people don't like the thing, how long does that last?
A couple, 3 days, because
Maybe
the
not even
cycle
that long.
is not even that long, because the cycle is so. That's why you've noticed, Jen, to your point, people, when they put out bad news now, they put it out late on Friday, or they put it out Saturday morning. People are announcing stuff on Saturday and Sunday. When we first came into the business, we were like, don't put out a press release on Friday afternoon. Now, if you got something you want to put it out and you want to be buried, you put it out Friday at 5 o'clock, or Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, or Sunday when you get out of church. I mean, people don't care anymore, but you're absolutely right.
Right. And so that's the thing, is that things aren't in the news cycle for a long, long time, but they get one or two pushback pieces and then they just, like, they're done. And now they're spending a lot more time doing the rebuttals than the thing was in the news cycle. And that's a part of conflict. It's a part of being able to say that we're going to do this thing. Okay, what news sources are probably going to write something? What have they written in the past? How long is it going to sit there? What people do we need to notify beforehand, just so that we can say, hey, this is what we're doing? Maybe send someone to talk to them, pat them on the shoulder. But people don't think of that. Like, conflict is so critical, and instead they get pushed back and they fold. And right now in this time, you have to have a stronger chest. You have to be like, this is what we're saying and what we believe in. And right now, we're not seeing that. People before 3 years ago were writing out strongly worded letters on Black Lives Matter and all this stuff, now are walking on eggshells, and there's really no reason. The reason is because they're afraid of conflict and the pushback but right now, the thing that they're not realizing is that you're going to get pushback either from these news sources for a few days or from your athletes for a few months. And you got and that's the thing, is you have to pick your poison. If we're about supporting the athletes, if we're about centering their experiences, then we need to know that the few days of pushback is not going to be anything compared to what is going to happen to our student athlete experience. And so I think the main thing when we think about, how do we keep doing that, is thinking about contextualizing, what does conflict look like? How do we acknowledge that these things are going to make people mad and still go through with it? How do we have robust applicant pools? And then I think lastly is, how do we center the experiences of our student athletes, of the most marginalized, and saying, like, we might get blowback, but these are the people we're going to center because this is who we're here for.
Jim, we've had this conversation before, but when people first get into this space and want to be an advocate for DEI, they want to come in and they want to get in the room and they want to start talking, and instead of just sitting back and listening, hearing the conversations, hearing what needs to be done, hearing different stories. How do you go about telling somebody? Because for me, the way I was 10 years ago is not how I am now. 10 years ago, I wasn't a listener, I was a talker. Now I get in the room and I listen, and a lot of that is because I have a daughter. So I'm more on the inclusive side now, because I want her to be able to get things that I've been able to get, not based on skin color, but based on gender, because I see it every day how, and there's different organizations that are male-based, there's different organizations that are white male-based. But what would you tell somebody that's getting into this field for the first time, to be an advocate, to not get in a room and just start talking and just actually listen to the conversations going on? And then at the end, when it's time, it's time.
I'd say the first thing, if you're going to get in this, man, you got to be prepared for a fight. Like, I think people don't realize that this is, the truth of it is a marathon. I don't know if any of y'all have run a marathon. I've run 2, and mile 1 is really pretty. Point 2 is really pretty. That mile 20, child, that one be having you divert to your car. Like, that mile, those miles in between. And I think the thing is that in 2020, people got into it at mile 1 when it was really sexy. and it was really easy. Everyone's doing it, everyone's saying it, so it's really sexy and easy to get into it. We're at mile 16 right now, where it's hard, it's ugly, it's painful. You have to push, you have to fight, and you have to be about it, because the sexiness of 2020 is worn off. And right now we're literally in a dogfight. And I think the thing that people don't understand is that the dog fighting you're doing is not just at work, it's at home, it's with your friends, it's with your family. It's about being willing to tell your dad, we're not saying that, that's inappropriate. It's those are that's the fight. Because I think people think like what you said, Travis, it's coming into room and being like, whoa, 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 I know what to do. No, if you ain't telling grandpa he's problematic, don't be in this room trying to talk about something, because you're not trying to do the really hard stuff. And I empathize with you and my heart goes out. And it doesn't mean we don't do the hard stuff, because I think that's what people don't realize is they think it's coming in and just talking. The hard stuff is listening. The hard stuff is self-reflecting. The hard stuff is realizing, damn, I had this thought all wrong. And if I would have said something, woo, it would have blown up in my face. And that's their self-reflecting, because what people do is they come and talk, it blows up. And then it's like, see, I tried to be an ally and look what happened. No, you tried to come in here and pretend like you knew everything. And then when accountability happened, you don't know how to handle it. And now you're trying to leave. See, this is why I don't do this stuff. Well, you weren't really in it in the first place. And so the biggest thing is sitting back and listening not only helps you get a fuller frame of the picture, right? It's almost like if you're looking at a piece of art here versus at here. If you're right here, you only see a little bit. If you're stepping back, you're able to see the whole piece and the colors and everything. And that's what you want, because now you can see a fuller story and you know where to add in. If I'm looking at a piece of art like this and I'm like, well, it needs more green. Had I stepped back, I would have seen all of this was green. And everyone's like, what do you mean? What do you mean it needs more green? It needs more green. I don't know what to tell you. I'm just saying from my perspective, it needs more green. And everyone around is like, bruh, 90% of the painting is green. I just don't see it. I don't understand. But if you take a step back, you're like, I see this whole paper, this whole picture. Had I said that it needed more green, I would look like a damn idiot. And it's not about me saying something, it's about me even having like a level of self-protection. Because there have been times where I've been like in space and I've been like, let me just wait and not say something. And then when the picture showed up, I was like, oh, child, thank God I did not say something. So it's that, as you get to see a fuller picture when you step back and just wait and listen. You start to self-reflect. Why would I have thought that? Why was I going to say that? Why did I want to say that to that person? And that's a key part, is the self-reflection. Because like I tell people, you don't need to learn more about Black people. You need to learn more about white people. As someone that's able-bodied, I don't need to learn about the disabled experience as much as I need to learn about my views as an able-bodied person on disability. Because then if I understand my views, I can shape them more. If I'm just hearing their perspective, then I can ask, well, I don't understand this. Well, why this, why that? Versus me having my perspective and saying, okay, now I understand the things I need to mentally shift that was causing me to be ableist, to me to think that disabled people were less than. But if I'm only saying I need to hear their perspective, I'm not shifting anything in my view. And so kind of answer, to go back to it, it's really about when you go in the room, you're only seeing this much of the painting, and that's going to hurt you. And you're not willing at that point, I guarantee, not being willing to be held accountable, right? Travis back then was probably not willing to be held accountable. Travis right now is like, a part of doing this marathon is being willing to be held accountable, even though that should hurt. Like I've had it where somebody says to me, I'm like, I'm sorry. And man, that hurts. And it doesn't stop from being that you should be being held accountable.
Well, let me tell you something, Jen. You just said it. You gotta, don't talk about it, be about it. Mm-hmm. And when Travis and I ascended up in a role that's leading DEI efforts for an organization like College Sports Communicators that has the racial makeup that it has.
Mhm.
Look, it's had the racial makeup. It's gonna have the racial makeup. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we said early on is that we can't, you just said it, we can't worry about whether the people who are minorities have the right perspective. We need to have the majority of our organization to have the right perspective so that we can work together in the way that we need to do. So we have an inclusive environment for all and not just making sure a few folks feel good, because that's not going to get us anywhere.
Mhm.
It hasn't gotten us anywhere. We've made some steps. You're absolutely right. When everything was all sexy in mile one, we were putting out racial and social justice initiative and critical conversations, and boy, we was looking good. But now we done got to that mile 16, like you said, and we can barely get people to get on a call. We can barely get people to even use the word DEI. We can barely get people to be a part of a conversation. And I think part of it is that conflict. I got to go back to that conflict. If you don't mind for a second,
Yeah.
because I think where our people sit a lot of places, a lot of times, a lot of the people in our organization, they're not in the lead position, whether they're not the lead in their department or they're not the lead in their overall department, athletic department, conference office. So trying to have conflict and deal with creating or managing conflict from their space is something that is extremely uncomfortable for them.
Absolutely.
So we don't, and we've been trying to tell them, because we always say, Travis knows this, you got to be uncomfortable. You got to get comfortable being uncomfortable if you're going to talk about DEI. And we say that not because it sounds fun or it sounds sexy, because that's the whole point. So what have you, as you're talking and thinking about, and you've done a lot talking to folks in college athletics and especially folks in our profession, dealing with that conflict, how do you, engaging in that conflict, how do you approach it in a way that maybe is a little different than maybe you might have before? And how do you get comfortable in the conflict? I don't really know how to best say it, but that's really where it's at. You got to get comfortable in the conflict.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, one of the reasons why I actually moved to conflict and culture was because I felt like doing DEI work was step 2, conflict is step 1. Because it doesn't matter what book you read, what movie you watch, if you're not comfortable with conflict, you're not going to do anything. You're not, and that was one of the biggest things, is that we have to get comfortable with conflict. And you're not ever going to be 100% comfortable. It's still going to be hard depending on the context. I'm not sure if you all have elderly parents, but conflict with elderly parents is very different than conflict with your friends, right? You have to be somewhat manipulative. You got the stuff you got to do to keep them safe and healthy is very different than conflict with someone else. And so the thing about it is that people are so conflict avoidant that it's almost a detriment to themselves. It's a detriment, some of the, I don't want to say problematic things that have come out, we'll say in sports, if it's like an ad or activation, there was probably someone who was like, yeah, this ain't a good idea, but I'm not going to say something because I just don't want to get involved. And I think it's a few things. I think to get comfortable with conflict, you have to start peeling back your origin story on conflict, because many people don't think about their origin story. It's like, well, I'm just conflict avoidant. Well, why are you conflict avoidant? It didn't just grow on trees. All of a sudden, you weren't just conflict. It came from somewhere. Like anything else, it's a skill. Dealing with conflict is a skill that we just don't learn. We don't think of it as a skill. We think of it either we're in conflict or we're not, and that's it. And then when we're in conflict, it's this really big, scary thing. Not how do we manage just the nuances of conflict day to day. And it could be that conflict is an email that someone sent and the time was wrong. And instead of being like, well, I just don't want to say something and embarrass them, you allow the time to be wrong, which implodes everything else. And so you really have to get comfortable with your origin story of like, how do I manage conflict? Why do I? And many times it's because you're a caretaker. It's because you're parents. The way they manage conflict, the way they interacted with each other, the way that they interacted with you, the way they interacted with their grandparents, their siblings, your siblings, all has a direct effect on how you manage conflict. And then when we get into the workspace, what we tend to see is that a lot of people don't have self-reflection on conflict, so they bleed all over everyone else. We all know when our boss is going through a divorce. is having problems with their kids. Like, we all know it. And many times they think that they're doing a really good job of hiding it. It's like when you play peekaboo with a kid, right? Like, you think you're doing a good job, everyone else sees you. And that's that lack of self-reflection and being able to say, okay, I'm having a bad day. Am I bleeding all over my coworkers? Am I bleeding all over people? And so when you start to get more comfortable with conflict, you're more comfortable with pushing back. You're more comfortable with self-advocating. You're more comfortable with boundaries. You're more comfortable with documenting things. So maybe we're in a meeting and I know that this thing, if we activate it, it's going to go really bad. And I've said it a few times and no one wants to listen to me. So finally, I just, at the end, I'm going to send the email to the whole group. Hey, thanks for a great conversation. I just want to reiterate my feelings on this activation. So I'm putting this in documentation. Guess what you have? You have a document saying JenFry did not agree with this. And people aren't comfortable with conflict, so they're not comfortable in documenting stuff, and they're not comfortable with making sure that they are taken care of. Instead, it's like, well, I just won't say something. I don't want to make people mad. Okay. And then this thing blows up, and guess who's the first person thrown under the bus?
Absolutely. You become collateral damage.
Baby, what? You are, they took out that house. Did you ever see, this is super random, but there's that show Griselda out now.
I haven't seen it, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So Cocaine Cowboys was like the precursor to it. And in there, they talked about Griselda Blanca, who then had this about her. And the way she kind of started the blood and guts of the drug trade was that if she wanted to take you out at a restaurant, she took out everyone else. And if she missed you, she taken out everyone else again. And you become that collateral damage. The lowest person on that totem pole, you finna be taken out first. Sorry, we realize this happened. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to let you go. And that's the thing about conflict, is you have to be able to advocate for yourself fiercely. You have to advocate in ways, because the better you're dealing with conflict, the better you're gonna be able to self-advocate. The better you're gonna be able to say no. Like, and it's hard. Power structures are hard. You saying this to your boss, you saying this to your coworker, you saying this to your coworker that's your boss's best friend, right? All of those things are all about conflict. And the better we work on that skill, the better we're going to be in those situations. But we have to know our origin story in order to figure out what things we need to work on.
Conflict is you hit it. You have to know how to handle it, or you don't. Because if you know how to handle it and you're not afraid of conflict, you'll be in a better place. But the generation, and I hate to say this way, but Scottie, me and you, the older generation now that is kind of middle-aged, is becoming the older generation in our business. When we go to hire, we look at the generation now, the 22 through 25-year-olds, and know, hey, if we hire this person, what are we going to get? They're great workers, but what are we going to get as far as what they're going to bring in because of what they've gone through for 10 or 15 years? And I'm talking male, female, white, black, whatever. What do you tell somebody in our organization or any organization? How do you handle not being afraid to take a chance?
So I think that's a really good question. And I think what, to me, that centers is trauma. We are not, as athletics as a whole, have we really thought about the trauma that COVID caused us? Because we're not only talking about the trauma that caused us, where in the span of 2 months, all these jobs had to be let go. So there was a trauma of sitting there every day of thinking, am I going to be fired in this economy? So I think that trauma, the trauma of some of these kids who couldn't leave situations that they needed to leave, trauma of the staff who now had to manage their family. Y'all probably had to homeschool your kids, right? You had to be the science teacher, the math teacher, the English, like, we got those skills, and you had to do that. Like, that trauma of some of these coaches of having to manage their team's health, their team's family health. They're now being the teachers of their kids, managing their kid. Like, they had to do all that's trauma. And we haven't talked about all of that. We haven't talked about, I was talking to my chief of staff. It doesn't feel like it's been 4 years since COVID. Like it feels like it was yesterday. It's been 4 years. And the thing I would tell people who are like this generation coming up, I think the first thing is that we need to all acknowledge the trauma that we've been through and how it affects us doing our job. I think the second thing is that you have to get really honest with the skill building that you're going to help them build. Meaning that these kids coming in, you are going to have to teach them how to deal with conflict face to face. You're going to have to teach them how to work in this environment. Like you're going to have to teach them those things. And I think a lot of people don't think about that. I think when they get these certain demographics of ages, and they're like, this kid isn't doing this generation versus saying, I have to now teach these students, these employees, these certain skills. Because I hate to say this, the reality of it, our age, we never were taught how to deal with conflict. Like we never had the skills of it, but we had more face-to-face that made us have to do it a little bit more. That deals with conflict on their phone. If I'm mad at you, I'm just going to send you, Scottie, a 30-page text message and then block you, right? Like that's how I do it.
Exactly
and
right.
then I'm going to go on Snapchat and make a video about you, but it's not really about you, right? It's not going to be about Scottie Rodgers. It's going to be about Roddy Scodgers. Right? Like that. And I wasn't talking about Scottie. I didn't say his name. No, you said Roddy Scodgers, who works not for the Cotton Bowl, but for the Apple Bowl. Like you're talking about this person. And so they've managed these other very passive aggressive ways of managing conflict with people, or they go straight aggressive because social media allows this anonymity that I can say whatever things I want to you and just have a fake picture and a fake name, and I can just say whatever. And so now you have this age group that has like the Finstagrams where they just have a fake account, or they have multiple accounts to say all these things, and they're not used to engaging face to face. And that scares the hell out of them because they don't know how to engage face to face saying, you hurt me. I apologize for hurting you. I was wrong in saying that. They don't know how to do that, which is really, really personal. They only know how to do it in a bigger way that includes a lot more people versus you and me talking this out. And that's where some of the problems happen, is that I think a lot of these conflicts blow up because of location. If me and you, Scottie, can't talk about this, because we know the story.
Mm-hmm.
We can't talk about it because you then brought your friend Travis, who's like, Travis, don't believe Jen. Scottie, don't believe what she's saying. What's going on? Don't believe her. And now, instead of me and you who know the story able to talk it out, you're getting riled up by Travis. Man, you're right, Travis. And now this thing that could have kept this friendship or this relationship. And guess what Travis has done? Travis also, man, Scottie, don't believe her. We got this on footage. What are you saying? And so now this is something that could have been easily fixed. And we don't see the repairing of harm. We don't see the acknowledgement of trauma. We don't see any of that because you're afraid and don't have the skills of this thing. So you bring in Travis brings in his camera. Now we're recording. Now I feel some type of way. So where I was about to maybe apologize to you, Scott, and be like, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't have said that. Now I'm like, and now again, it's this big with something that could have been this big because they don't have those skills. And so people hiring need to acknowledge you are teaching this generation how to do face-to-face conflict, which means that you have to get comfortable with how you manage face-to-face conflict and pull off the scab that might have been causing some bleeding that you didn't realize.
Jen, what's that? Let's break this down because look, you telling people how it really is, but let's start at the start, because when somebody listens to this webinar and they're trying to understand what you're saying, they're trying to figure out, what can I do?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do? So if you were talking to someone who's trying to make that first step to manage conflict within themselves, to manage that conflict with something going forward, whether it's a DEI initiative or not, what would you tell them or try to give them to guide them in making those first steps?
So if it was you and I, Scottie, the very first thing I would say is think about how your family managed conflict. Right? How did your mom manage it? How your dad? How did they do it together? Or if it was a single parent, how did your parent manage the siblings or you? Because that right there is going to tell you a lot. And that is, when I tell you, that's not only pulling off a scab, that might be opening a whole new incision. Because we don't like to admit the trauma that our family or parents have caused us. And we have covered that up. So that would be my first thing, because if you said, Jen, well, tell me, how did your mom manage conflict? I'd be like, well, my mom had 5 kids by the time she was 25. And then she adopted me at 42. So when she had 5 kids by the time she was 25, she had no time for conflict. None. So it was a lot of the do as I say, because I said so, a lot of the passive aggressive, conflict avoidant. That was how she managed it. And then when she adopted me, I got the one that was like really manipulative with her tears and everything, just to silence me. So I realized that I then, as a teenager, I was super aggressive, would yell and scream because I just wanted to be heard. And think about when you don't feel like you have a voice. What is the old saying? Like, riots are the voice of the oppressed. When you don't feel like you have a voice, what do you do? What do kids do when they can't verbalize? They have tantrums, right? Like when they can't verbalize what's wrong, that's when they act out in all different ways. Think about it. A lot, I saw this one, it was a beautiful scene, this kindergarten teacher who was like, I need to hear your words. When you stop crying, we can talk about what's wrong. Because people don't understand how they just emote instead of being able to sit and say the words. Because to many people, saying the words are really hard. To say, I am really anxious right now. I am really scared. I am really hurt. Those are hard because we're not teaching that. So my first step will literally be like, think about how your family managed it. Because if you tell me how your family managed it, I can probably talk about how you manage it now. Or it's you either manage it the same way or you went polar opposite. So you had an aggressive parent who would punch walls and cuss. So now you're super conflict avoidant. You don't say a word because of that trauma. Or you are super aggressive because of that. Right? So your origin story will tell people a lot about how you manage conflict. And our origin story is painful. Like that is pulling out scabs, blood. Like when you do that origin story, and if you don't get close to your trauma, your origin story, you can't heal. You can't be better. You can't be a better partner, parent, spouse, coworker, friend. You can't be better at any of those until you get really close to that origin story to start healing from it.
Jen, this is my last question, and let's go opposite of what Scottie just said, people getting in for the first time. What do you tell people that have been in it for a while that are about to give up? You hit on the marathon, but people that have been in it for a while, or how do you tell somebody, just be real, that you're just in it because you want your name attached to it, that you're not really doing it? What are the 2 things you can do there? Because we hit on it before we started, the question you asked at the panel at the convention last summer. There are a ton of people fighting to do what's right, but there are also people acting like they're fighting to do what's right. How do you tell people that have been in it for a while to not give up? And then on the other hand, tell people that are in it just to be in it, to have their name attached to it, to be real, you don't really want to do this.
Oh man. So I think the first thing, the people that are in it, I think at this point, we are not doing the 26.2 mile marathon. We're doing that 100-mile Colorado one. Like we're doing that one, baby. We up in the boulders. We at that elevation. Like we are at that. We're in this 100-mile one because it's the hardness of this is not a normal marathon, because again, we're going against legislation. We're going against like the stuff that we were going against before, we're not going against it. We're literally, people are changing legislation, things that will affect kids for centuries. So I would say to them is, you have to be willing to rest. Like you have to be willing to rest, because rest is something that when we're doing this work, we don't think we can, but you have to. Like, be willing to rest. I think the next thing is how can you build up a coalition of people that you can push stuff to that can better move it forward, right? So there are going to be things that while Scottie wants to do them, he will know that if it comes from you, it will push it faster. And when I worked at Duke, it's called Racial Equity Institute, and they're fabulous. They were the ones who gave me a lot of my foundational training. And they were doing this free 4-hour groundwater training like around Duke. And I was like, we just had these big issues at Duke. I was like, our group should go. And there was so much pushback from our dean, so much pushback. And one of my white friends who is an academic dean was like, I'll take care of it. And she then emails and gets the thing that I wanted to do push forward. And that's okay as long as it got done. So it really is kind of this aspect of building that coalition of, I want this thing pushed forward, but if it comes from me, it's not going to be pushed forward. But if it comes from you, it will be pushed forward. So really being thoughtful in how you can, build coalitions to push things forward, and what does it need to be pushed forward? Like being very thoughtful about that, because that's the only way we're going to do this is coalition building. We can't do this as dots. We have to build it together. It was just like, I saw this picture on LinkedIn or on Facebook, and it was like one big fish going after a lot of individual fishes, and then all of the individual fishes making one big fish going after that other fish. And that's what you need, is you need all these small fishes making one big fish. And the way you do that is you have to lean on each other to push it forward. So that would be like the thing, if you're in there, you got to be real smart with that coalition building. Who are the people in power that can push this forward? What language shifts do we need to have to push it forward? We're not going to call it DEI. We're going to call it this thing, but it's really got the same bones, and we're pushing it forward. So being very thoughtful in playing this game, right? Like I said back at the beginning, a lot of this anti-LGBT or woke law, there's no actual things, but it makes you so afraid because it's so opaque that something might occur. And so how can we think about kind of in that same way of like making it opaque enough, but we're still going to push it through? And I think to your question about the people who are just in it for their name, I think it's then to start pushing them. If you're in about this, then we're going to need to see you doing X, Y, Z, and being willing to do that. Because I think the thing is that we see the people who, well, I want to help you out, but then you don't. And it's okay at this point in your life, maybe you can't do that. And this is what we need from you, right? Like, these are the things I think for you, Travis, as a white man, to really push those white men on it. Like, this is what we need from you. If we are all doing this together, and this is what we need from you. And to help people realize that what they thought that what they were doing was like in 2020 when everyone was doing it, where it was cool and sexy, right? Mile 1, where everyone is running the marathon, like, woo, with the pictures. And now it's went from a 26er to a 100-miler. And it's not fired and all of that. And how are they actually going to handle their business? And so really pushing people to do things. Okay, you said, John, you are a part of this group. This is what we need from you, and giving specific things to push them on what we need from them. Not opaque things. These are specific things we need to push it forward, to put your name on, because people don't want to put their name on stuff. We want you to put your name on it. And that's a different thing.
It's hard for me to even respond to so much of what you said here, Jen, because the coalition to change a culture is a perfect analogy for what we're trying to do for CSC, because we're trying to build our coalition to move this thing forward. Travis and I talk about this a lot. We're the head of the DEI committee, but we're just two individuals that's trying to be advocates. And we need people like you that help us move things forward, because we think we know, and we don't always know, but we really appreciate you and people like you taking time to guide us and give us information and perspectives and just frank conversation, to be totally honest with you, because that's one of the hardest things about this topic that Travis and I mean, we literally talk about this almost every day. This is a hard conversation to have all the time. And we have it all the time. He and I just on the phone, just talking on our own lives, on our work lives, on what we're trying to do for this organization. And we need people like you, and we just appreciate you taking time to come on this platform and giving us some tips and some directions and some perspectives, because we need it. And we're gonna call you again at some point. The phone's gonna keep ringing, the emails are gonna keep popping. So we really appreciate this opportunity, and I just want to make sure to say that so that everybody else can hear it, because we need it. And if we don't get it, and if we don't do this thing together, we all shall perish.
Yeah, the thing I'll say, and I appreciate you having my phone's always open for y'all. I want people to understand, like, it's hard. We're not saying that it's so hard to tell friends that you've been friends with for 30 years what you're saying is problematic. It's hard. It's hard to change systems when you feel like you take one step forward and it's 30 steps back. It's like, this is such a hard thing to do. On Instagram, there was a video, a guy whose wife is deaf, and he was talking about how they wanted to go to a show, and they consistently, it's like 6 weeks before, were emailing this show about interpreter, and the show essentially ghosted them. And this guy's like, we're filing an ADA complaint against this. And in the comments, people were like, who do you think you are that you would get, that they would pay for an interpreter? Who do you think? And all this, like, then just don't go to the show. And all of these just horrible comments. And the thing about it is, like, it's hard because you're seeing all that. People will sometimes only react when it affects them. Those people that had those comments, if they started to go deaf, they would have a very different view. Everyone has this idea, this theoretical idea of who they are until it actually happens, right? There was another thing about a hockey player had pushed a wheelchair down a flight of stairs. And people were like, how could where was the person, all this stuff? If it was me, I wouldn't have gone there and left my wheelchair. Fred, you wouldn't know what you do, but I tell you what you would do. You wouldn't miss out on time with your friends and sitting at home. Like, you wouldn't do that. This theoretical idea that people have until it hits them, and now it's a different thought. And the thing I say is that this is hard when it's not hitting you. This is hard when you can just shut your laptop or your phone and go about your day, walking down your stairs, listening, seeing, not having to worry about your gender. Like, those things are really easy. It's hard to stay in the moment when it's not affecting you in any way, shape, or form. And we have to acknowledge the hardness and keep doing it, because at one time it will affect you. It might not be now. It'll end up happening. It's like the old adage of the canary in the coal mine, right? The canary, it's telling you that it's warning you of danger. And once the canary dies, it's too late. Like, right now, we're trying to be canaries in this coal mine of like, hey, this is what's going on. And you can ignore us. But then when it comes to you, then it's going to be too late to do anything, or it's going to take so long to get back that it won't even be possible in your life. So it's hard. Take a break, but you have to keep doing it.
Jen, look, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for answering the message to jump on. And Scottie, thank you to you two for your leadership on our committee. Jen, your candidness is going to last months and years, because people will be able to go back and watch this. And I hope 5, 10 years, 15 years down the road, people are still going back watching this to learn and to grow, because what you said today will affect generations moving forward, because just the shift in the culture. And I think it's been beneficial. And again, just thank you from the bottom of my heart for saying yes to jumping on and doing this. It meant a lot to me. I know it means a lot to Scottie. It's going to mean a lot to CSC when everybody goes back and looks at it.
Awesome. I'm glad I get to help you all.
So for those that are watching this, this on-demand webinar is available on the CSC website and our YouTube page, and also as a podcast on numerous podcast channels. We encourage you to check out our website, collegesportscommunicators.com, for updated information on what's on tap for CSC programming and continuing education. And again, thank you for jumping on doing this crucial and critical conversation.
Of course. I appreciate you, friends. Thank you.
Until next time.